Welcome to UFO Classified.
So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am, my skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course the tinfoil hat guy's going to see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it's used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is. And you just kind of adapt and overcome.
What are you going to do with all this? You can't even take care of your own files and get them put into the current system, but yet you want to go collect other people's things. So what are you going to do with it? Who are you giving all this to?
It just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception, but deception of a human nature. So that's what I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean, then I started thinking about the intelligence agencies, what role they could play, and what would be their motivations for getting involved in ufology.
I'm not saying that because the gimbal is not a rotating flying saucer, that means that all the UFOs are false. Not at all. All I'm doing is I'm looking at this one case, these individual cases, and seeing if there's an explanation for those. So try to, if I could ask people out there listening, don't think that I'm trying to attack your entire beliefs about these things.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to UFO Classified. I'm your host, Erica Lukes. Happy to be here and see my friends all in chat. You guys are finding me. I want to thank Scott Brown for the beautiful graphics for my show. Of course, Mario for being my right-hand man. You guys mean the world to me. I have a wonderful supporting audience. I want to thank all the people that take their time to become a Patreon and to show support for the show. You know that I am passionate about what I do, and you know that I do my homework. I spend countless hours a week researching this topic, and I know that there is something of merit, and it is incredibly important for each and every one of us to understand that there are things we can't understand. So understand that. That was a deep thought. I don't know. Anyway, my point is we are experiencing things, and that's why a lot of us are here. We've had paranormal, quote unquote, experiences or UFO sightings. We've had things in our lives that have raised questions with us, and we're turning and looking for answers. And unfortunately, what we see in the UFO community is nothing. We see dysfunction. We see corruption. We see bad actors, people who have the egos the size of West Texas, all sorts of things that play into it. And then we have the fact that there has always been a very concerted effort by the intelligence community to make sure this topic looks as ridiculous as it can, to gather information behind the scenes. And it really is unfortunate. December 2017, we saw the big New York Times article came out that promised us UFO disclosure. How long has it been now? And yet we've got another article that just dropped that I'm going to talk a little bit about in a moment. Yesterday, and people were so excited. They, yes, disclosure. And people are on, social media saying that this is going to come out and that's going to come out. And, well, how do you look now? Kind of a little ridiculous. I'm just kind of saying. But nothing came. It's just more of the same. Oh, yes, it will come. Keep following my carrot. That sounds like a wonderful idea. And people are not using their brain, or maybe they're just really bored and they think it sounds like a fun thing to do. But all I got to say is kind of, open your eyes, get over yourself, do what you need to do. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the CIA. and its connection. We know that you look at To the Stars Academy and, oh, isn't that interesting? We've got all these players from the CIA that have security clearances. Well, you have to have an active contract to be, to have secret clearances. So think about that. Think about some of the statements Elizondo and co. have made. They're retired, yada, yada, yada. Do you think that maybe perhaps To the Stars Academy is just another front, like we perhaps saw back in the 60s, to gather information, to steer the narrative, and to eventually kind of discredit the subject and to line the pockets of private contractors? Yeah, I kind of think that's what's happening. And if you don't, then you need to look further and you need to really listen to some of my shows. Get it together, people. This is imperative. So I'm going to read just a little bit here. There is an article called Operation Mockingbird. New York Times confesses to role in subverting First Amendment by Bob Fertakis. A little teeny quote in here, which is important. Indeed, Alex Constantine, in his Mockingbird, The Subversion of the Free Press by the CIA, estimates some 3,000 salaried and contract CIA employees were eventually engaged in propaganda efforts. Check out Alex Constantine. He's done a lot of work in this. Then you have another article here that was in the New York Times. It's called Worldwide Propaganda Network Built by the CIA. This is back from 1977. I'm going to read a portion of this. The thread that linked the CIA and its propaganda assets was money, and the money frequently brought a measure of editorial control, often complete control. In some instances, the CIA simply created a newspaper and news service and paid the bills through a bogus corporation. In other instances, directly or indirectly, the agency supplied capital to an entrepreneur or appeared at the right moment to bail out a financially troubled organization. According to an agency official, the CIA preferred, where possible, to put its money into an existing organization rather than found one of its own. If a concern is a going concern, the official said, it's better to cover. The important thing is to have an editor or someone else who's receptive to your copy. And then here we have from Wikipedia a little quote, CIA influence on public opinion, and this section is planted news. Ralph McGehee, a former CIA officer, stated that the CIA often placed news stories anonymously into news publications to spread false ideas favorable to the CIA goals. Stories that the CIA planted might be picked up and further spread by additional newspapers, which we're seeing, and other third parties in a slightly altered form, or even picked up as a news and rewritten by a journalist. Propaganda thus planted by the CIA to shape public opinion could circle and contaminate the CIA's own information files. An example given by McGehee based on his own experience is the CIA fabrication in 1965 of a story about weapons shipments sent by the sea to Viet Cong in a CIA effort to prove foreign support for the Viet Cong. The CIA took tons of communist-made weapons from its own warehouses, loaded them on Vietnamese coastal vessels, faked a firefight, and then called Western reporters to prove North Vietnamese aid to the Viet Cong. The story was later picked up by other news sources, and so much that the Marines began to patrol the coast and intercept reported contraband. And then yet, in one more little blurb here, CIA and mass media, the Central Intelligence Agency has made use of mass media assets, both foreign and domestic, for its covert operations. Now on to the latest story that made the buzz in the UFO community, and people are talking about that New York Times, Robert Blumenthal and Leslie Kean dropped yesterday. No longer in the shadows. The Pentagon's UFO unit will make findings public. We've been hearing that song and dance for a long time now. And in it, it says, Senator Marco Rubio, the Florida Republican who is the acting chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, told a CBS affiliate in Miami this month that he was primarily concerned about reports of unidentified aircraft over American military bases, and that it was in the government's interest to find out who was responsible. He expressed concern that China or Russia or some other adversary had made some technological leap that allows them to conduct this sort of activity. Mr. Rubio said some of the unidentified aerial vehicles over U.S. bases possibly exhibited technologies not in the American arsenal, but he also noted maybe there is a completely sort of boring explanation for it, but we need to find out. So, Here you have that statement by Rubio. You've got the solicitation sheet for OSEP, where it says that they're looking into threats from technology for more foreign powers. And really that's, in my opinion, what this is about. It's a big spy game. It's a big cover story. So if you're looking for disclosure from any of that group, I'm going to tell you you're not going to get it. And my advice would be to run fast and far. And don't get yourself wrapped up in all of that. We know that there are people, I'm sure, that are being paid by certain people to spread things on social media, to promote propaganda. And so look at it for what it is, and then let's just move forward and know that there is something out there worthy of study. And we're going to weed through the nonsense to get through it. So there you have it. There's my opening monologue. My guest this evening, Nick Roesler, he's been Nick, and I'm just going to call you Nick, but he's been involved in the paranormal research, specifically UFOs, since '98. And in that time, he worked extensively with the Mutual UFO Network and Smoking Gun Research Agency. He previously served as both assistant and state director for Wisconsin Mufon, as well as the staff photographer for the Mufon Journal. He has worked in media, hosting an In Focus Paranormal Talk Radio from 2009 to 2011, Beyond Deep Black Radio from 2015 to 2016. He's frequently lectured on photographic evidence UFO cases across the U.S. In his professional life, he spent 19 years in the criminal justice field from 1999 through 2018 before retiring on medical advice. He presently resides in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, owns and operates a small business. And Nick, thank you for coming to the show, because we've been communicating quite some time about the latest bombshells that have been happening with Mufon. I talked to Phil Leach. I had a show last week, which you listened to, about some of the new allegations and things. And so it's good to get somebody's perspective who, you had said on social media that you think that the organization can be revamped. And I wanted to talk to you about that and a lot more this evening. But first of all, I want to say, what do you think of some of the things that are currently taking place, specifically what I just mentioned with the New York Times?
Well, that's kind of a bit to chew on, but I think you did a great service to folks by mentioning specifically CIA and Mockingbird and some of their past history there. One of my closest friends and colleagues in this field, now passed on, John Nowinski, spoke in depth on this when he spoke at the 2003 Mufon International Symposium. Spoke on Mockingbird specifically, and others have done so to varying degrees. My friend and colleague Richard Dolan, chief among them. I think Mockingbird holds a lot of water here, because things like this don't die. They don't go away. Things just get shifted around. File numbers get changed. Program names get changed. And it's a revolving door. As far as connections to, some of the most recent cases and discussion, I think that's an open question. I think bravo to Leslie Kean for, the work that she's done in sourcing a lot of this, going back a number of years. I think a lot of this is really an open question.
And thank you for your comments on that. And I know we mentioned before the show started that, even though you and I might have differing opinions on things, it's still important for us to have an adult, civilized conversation so we can work through some of these things, because this is a whole new world. This is a subject that is fraught with many difficulties, as we both know. And so it's important to have a civilized discussion about things. And Do you feel, what are your thoughts on this new disclosure? Do you think this is something that we should really be hanging our hats on?
Again, I think it's an open question. I'd say yes and no. I think there's going to be some good that comes out of it, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I've got enough contacts, within the field of ufology and people that have, either navigated academia or, the military, complex aerospace industry, however you want to, phrase it. Steve Bassett, people like Richard Dolan, who are, who are in the know on some of these subjects. Richard, just as an example, the guy wrote a thesis on Cold War military history. I think he knows what he's talking about to a certain degree when you're talking about some stuff like this.
And I will very respectfully throw this out there. For me personally, I think, and it was interesting, I had Karen Dolan on my show about 4 weeks ago, and she was the former wife of Richard Dolan, and I had asked her a question about, was there a point in time when Dr. Hal Puthoff reached out to him, because I think this is an important question, and she said that yes, they were, right after one of his books came out, that Puthoff invited him to Earth Tech in Austin, and to me that raised a red flag, because now I see some of the things that he's putting out there, and I wonder if in some way he has not been manipulated by this group, because he seems to be very pro this group, even though we've got substantial evidence that the people that are involved now in this new disclosure have been up to no good for quite some time.
Oh, and that's again, I'd say that's an open question, but I'm just saying, so far as folks' credentials are concerned and backgrounds, these are the people that would be in a position to know more than not. Folks like Bassett, for example, with PRG. It's just when you have a background that lends itself to, a certain avenue of research. I think there are folks whose voices need to be heard and in some respects drown out the ancillary opinions, where, somebody may not have, the gravitas or the background to speak on, especially, a military subject necessarily.
Right. And I appreciate you answering that. And again, I know that we have different feelings on some of these things, but we also have similar feelings on a lot of things, and we both believe this subject is definitely of merit.
Right.
And it's been interesting in my own personal experience as I've gone through things. It's been a huge learning process for me, and I learned things kind of by being thrown into them. And I speak so frequently and so passionately about things because I don't want other people who are younger and coming into the subject to fall victim to the same things that I went through. And I see, for me, during a certain period, there were attempts to have these people step in and handle, quote unquote, me, or to try to, give me information, and they wanted me to put it out there for the world. I'm really glad I didn't, because something inside me said this is not going to be a good thing. And so I, stepped back, and then I let other people run with that. And it's kind of created a big I don't even know what, a big, another three-ring circus in ufology, which is unfortunate because that's not really where we need to be looking for the truth about the subject, but it's a great distraction. I mean, how do you feel? And let's talk about the Wilson documents and things and some of the other games that have been afoot as of late.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to any real degree as far as the Wilson documents, but I will say, just kind of as an armchair kind of opinion, from a distance, when that started to kind of make the rounds, I thought to myself, well, this is cute. This kind of, how is this any different from the MJ12 stuff that circulated in the mid 80s and early 90s? It's a variation on a theme.
And I mean, that's exactly right. And I'm glad that you brought up MJ12 because, again, you've got the same players involved and the same types of things. And then people who are researchers who are getting pulled into things and then given these documents and they put it out there. And so it is interesting to see how all of that is happening. And right. With regard to MJ12, like, I am amazed after the thorough debunking, thanks to people like Barry Greenwood, and all of his colleagues. I mean, that was 10 years in looking at every single thing, and it is
a minimum.
Yeah, and it's like this is garbage. And so why do you think the MJ12 documents and things that we know have been disproven are still circulating, and now they're this bright shiny object that people are going to follow?
I think, just to backtrack just a touch, I would say I don't think necessarily all of the MJ12 stuff is garbage. I think with, just as you have with a lot of things, what's that saying about the best lie is hidden within two truths?
Right.
And that's I think the best. That's the best way to look at, say, MJ12 just as a point of clarification. I mean, the Wilson documents and things is not something that I've really delved into, but simply because, I've had other things going on in my private life, and I just haven't had the time to devote to a lot of the things that I would have liked. But just as an armchair aside, like I said, when this whole story started breaking, I had little red flags go up, little alarm bells that go off in my head of, this looks like a variation on a theme here. But, so I kind of set that aside for the moment and moved on to other things. But, I really think MJ12 as an example, or fill in the blank with any other major case where we've got a whole lot of questions, I think you're going to find some misinformation, but I think you're going to find a lot of genuine information that gets lost on the periphery as, for want of a better term, noise. Right, yeah. And I mean, I don't blame you. I try not to get too wrapped up in some of that the stuff that's going on right now, because it's just a waste of energy, and I can see it for what it is, and it's clearly a waste of energy. But I as far as the MJ12 documents and finding little bits of the truth in some of this other stuff, like what would you say in the MJ12 documents would be something that we should look at seriously? Well, I would have to actually dig the stuff out and go through it. But I think, when you have some of the names that were named in, the history of MJ12, not the least of which Secretary Forrestal and Vannevar Bush and others. I mean, you don't just throw these names around if there's not some, viable, logical linkage between them, and, obviously these people would have communicated one way or the other, and would have had certainly valid reasons for doing so. But, like I say, I don't think it's all garbage, but you have to source your materials and you have to do the research. And I think that's the be all and end all of it.
And that's been the interesting thing. I mean, I've looked, and I think it's important for me to really express to my listeners the fact that when I'm doing my best research, it has nothing to do with the UFO world. And so I'm always looking at, I'll go outside and I'll look at political connections. I will look at, who is working with who over the decades. All of these things. Where's the money going? And what would the need be? What's happening in our political climate during this decade? All of these things. And why would there be a need for us, during the Cold War to present this? And I think from my point of view right now, where I'm at, I think that some of the UFO myth that was created back in the beginning. I mean, it's like if you have a power in the world, the United States of America, and we have a crash disk, then that makes us, and we're reverse engineering technology, then doesn't that make us superior to anyone else in the whole world?
One would think.
You would think. And so that would be, if you're looking at it from, right, putting out a piece of propaganda to make another country feel a little unease, then you'd say, that would be a good one. Right. Well, and,
I think, I have a whole unpublished book manuscript dealing with black budget government projects, the UFO subject, and, eventual road to disclosure. Honestly, that's the kind of stuff, we're talking about, is who is talking to whom, when, and if you're looking at military personnel, who served with whom where, and who was in what position at such and such a time, and were they in a position to know or have access to this, that, or whatever information. And so I know, and I mean, like I said, my beliefs have changed, my thoughts, my feelings have changed so much about this. I look back now and I've got this beautiful archive that I've been creating over the years, and I've had wonderful donations, and I purchased a lot of things, and it's been so interesting because I can look at the books that were put out from 1947 on, or newspapers, and I'm really lucky, I've got periodicals from all over the world that I have in my collection, and I can go over there, I can read this and then say, okay, so I've got a magazine series that, it's like you've got back in the 60s, it's like, they're talking about the Russians doing this and aliens and da-da-da-da-da, and you look at some of these things and you step back and go, that's that's interesting. Right. I think there's a lot you could really, I don't know. I think there's something more there. And I think a lot of this has been used as a propaganda tool. And that's unfortunate because there is, oh my gosh, there's, I look at places, Hessdalen in Norway that I've been to that I talk a lot about, where they're actually doing scientific research, and it is not caught up in all of this
nonsense from America and the game playing and misinformation, disinformation. And I think that's real research. And then I look at what we've got going on here, and it's nothing.
Well, and like what you had said just previously, it's very similar to my friend and colleague, Mr. Nowinski, was fond of saying, as far as some of those things are concerned, there's some there. When you dig into certain things, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of extraneous stuff. But if you know where to look and how to look and so forth, you're going to eventually dig down to, okay, this is valid material, and let's pull this thread and see where this goes. So I mean, I'll tell you, the research part for me is always kind of the fun part until you get to the writing. The writing the writing is important, and but it's also the heavy lifting that I don't like, of a particular project. But if you're doing a book or something, and I have now two. I've got one unpublished and one that's been in print for some time. But, that stuff to me is the fun part. And I've gotten information from presidential libraries, from universities, from a number of presidential libraries, actually, various different things. And sometimes you don't know when the other shoe is going to drop, and I've got a amusing little anecdote as far as that goes. But yeah, I mean, it's fun.
It is. I mean, it is fun, and it's fun. And then sometimes I want to go hide in the closet, like you've talked about before. It's like this gets draining.
Right. And when I say fun, I mean, fun from a, I am, by some people's accounts, I am a bit of a nerd, so,
Me too.
When I say fun, I mean, it's like from the mental, exercise, type of, from the mental exercise, standpoint, it is kind of fun. I can tell you, when I did my first book, which it was published in 2009, so this would have been somewhere in the 2008 timeframe that I was putting things together. I had contacted the Gerald Ford Presidential Archive Library and asked for just a few particular documents that I was able to source, and I actually gave them, per your records, it should be in this box with this file number and thus and so. I'm looking for this letter dated this date to this individual and so forth. And within a half hour, 20 minutes, the archivist actually called me back and said, "Oh, by the way, would you like our miscellaneous, news items that might relate to it?" I'm like, "Oh, sure." And that turned into several hundred pages that were just, miscellaneous. But all related tangentially to the UFO subject, which was really kind of amusing.
And that's fascinating. It's so much fun to go to some of these libraries and get information and put it together, and that's the whole process is it expands your awareness on things. And so tell us the title of your book.
My first book was it was all on photo evidence cases, and that was in focus, and it was all of photographic evidence of UFOs.
And that
And
was, go ahead.
that was
Sorry.
all I was going to say, and that's all I focused on in that book. I focused on, given that my background was in, as you mentioned, the criminal justice field. I tried to build a case, so every one of those cases had something tangible to it, whether it was photographs or radar returns, or there was hard physical evidence of some sort tangential to each of those cases.
I have a person who is doing my graphics. He's a brilliant graphic artist, and he also has he runs In the Field on Facebook, and it is probably the most respected page that I can think of. And he analyzes some of these photographs and things. And so, talk about one of the best cases or photographic evidence that you found in that book, and why you think it is so important.
Well, honestly, where to begin? I think the Battle of Los Angeles case, famous, from the 40s. I think that's a phenomenal case for a number of reasons. The case I always come back to time and again was the flap of sightings over Washington, D.C. in the summer of '52, for a myriad of reasons. Because, what some folks might not realize, and it certainly becomes apparent in a post 9/11 world, that the entire district, to say nothing of the National Mall, the Capitol, the White House, etc., it's a no-fly zone. Was then, is now. And you have photographs showing objects in and around the dome of the U.S. Capitol. They should not be there. This is a problem. If you had any aircraft buzzing the District of Columbia, Northern Virginia, various parts of Maryland, Delaware, etc. I mean, if you're in D.C. airspace, you would, under any other reasonable condition, be shot down. So, question is, why are they there? And when you look at the radar returns and analyze the data there, these things are moving at rates of speed that we can't do, at least not with 1952 technology, or certainly reasonably anytime thereafter.
Right, that is a very interesting case. I've been fortunate enough to collect a lot of information, documentation about that over the years. And I mean, it's what other cases would you find, or photographs that would you find that were also very telling that there is something going on that we don't understand?
Well, I think I really think the Roswell case, as far as tangentially, because and some of that is as basic as reading body language. But I mean, you look at the Battle of Los Angeles in the 40s. Again, these are things that it just, there's no scientific or logical reason for. I mean, you fire on an unknown object, off the coast of the city of Los Angeles, for a significant period of time with heavy military, artillery, and then this thing just floats off as if nothing. So, I mean, there's matters of physics there. There's matters of there's questions that need to be answered.
And again, that is, that's one of those cases that we've heard about it. I mean, will always be a very, very interesting case. And I agree with you there. And so when you're looking at photographic evidence, what are you specifically looking at?
Well, I will hand it off to, I'll leave the analysis and such to folks like Mark D'Antonio, to get into the nitty gritty of the details of it. But in real basic terms, you're matching up, time of day this was said to have been taken versus does the shadows that you see in the actual photograph bear that out? Do you do the nitty gritty minutia of the image bear out what you're being told?
And that thank you for sharing that with me. And when you're doing other work into like the other, the witness evidence or witness testimony, some other types of things, like how do you put that together and then make a solid case? Well,
I mean, the very, very simple answer, and not to be glib about it, is carefully. I mean, it really is it's a jigsaw puzzle that you just have to, and I mean, this particular subject, you're not going to have the proverbial smoking gun. You're not going to have something necessarily akin to DNA evidence, or you're not going to have physical evidence in a lot of cases, if any. You're going to have circumstantial evidence. You're going to have witness reports. You're going to have weather data. You're going to have all sorts of miscellaneous pieces of data. And, okay, what is this case telling us? What is this report, this radar reading, this such and such? What are all these various different pieces telling us? And taken in concert, what do we see? I mean, that's basically the way I look at things. And, that's why I think if you look at other cases, say, for example, tip of the tongue, Chicago O'Hare sighting in 2006, I think that is one of those situations where you have to piece together small little things. And why did this happen? And, why were witnesses told this? And, why were reports handled this way and thus and so? I mean, you have to use a little bit of logic, a little bit of deductive reasoning, and, take what you have, what you know to be valid, and, build as logical a narrative as you can out of what you've got.
Right, and with the Chicago O'Hare case, that's such an interesting case because virtually every piece of data was swept up by who knows who. And I remember hearing at one point in time that Dan Aykroyd came in and bought everything, which I thought was interesting. But what do you think happened there? Why do you think things were hushed up and there was such a who would have stepped in to control that situation?
I would defer a question like that to my friend and colleague John Greenwald at the Black Vault, but honestly, I think that's anybody's guess. I think a lot of that stuff probably went from the pilots, from the miscellaneous grounds folks, witnesses, etc., through official channels at the FAA, probably towards, and what some folks don't realize is, like the city of Milwaukee, that you have a military base either attached to or adjacent to that airport. Milwaukee and Chicago both. And, I think it really pretty simply went from private pilots at United Airlines and Delta and whomever, a private airline, through the FAA and to fill in the blank within the military complex. I think that's a very reasonable assumption.
Well, and I mean, it's interesting. And you mentioned that there's a military base that abuts the airport. What military base is it, and what are they known for? I believe it's U.S. Air Force. I would have to double check. My friend and writing partner, Jody Mabry, actually mentioned that to me as I was, researching that book, simply because his father was previously stationed there at some point in his early life. And, he bounced around as a military brat any number of places, and that was just a comment that he made to me. I'd have to research that a little bit more and get back to you. I believe it's U.S. Air Force. And that would be interesting. And that's something that I've started to, really focus on. Actually, it's been a while since I've been focusing on that, but to look at where there are specific sightings clusters. And then, you look at the military bases, and then you look at, what are they testing there? What are these, and you go back historically, and it's really fascinating to see. And I think at one point in time, I would have thought that, okay, you've got UFOs that are hanging out around these bases and trying to see what's going on and yada yada. Now I'm thinking it might be our either our own or another country's. There's something else there, and I think it might be more down to earth than the extraterrestrial explanation.
I would say it's possibly all three, to be honest, because I don't know how you otherwise could explain away Malmstrom Air Force Base,
mm-hmm, right,
and some of the others. But
no, and you're right. That's a great case.
Right. But as far as O'Hare is concerned, Jody, if you're listening, give me a call, brother.
and yeah, I'll get you back and we can talk a little bit more about that, because these cases are very curious, interesting. I know that NARCAP. Ted Rowe is the executive director.
Right,
he's been on my show, many times, and they did a great job with regard to research on the O'Hare case, because they are, they investigate commercial and military pilot sightings, and so definitely I want to throw that out there. And you can look at NARCAP, read some of their technical reports. They are amazing. And they keep on coming. Ted has written a couple as of late, so definitely check that out.
Ted's good people, good researcher, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Enough said.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I love the work that he's done. I remember reading Project Sphere a long time ago, and that was very important to me. With regard to all of this. And I think that, Ted is somebody who looks at this as, and NARCAP, they view whatever is happening and taking place over military installations or places that, or next to something that imposes an aviation safety risk. And so they're
national
looking at
security concerns,
UAP,
certainly.
How to keep airline pilots safe, how to give them a safe way to report things without being ostracized, as we have seen when other pilots have reported things.
Oh, certainly. The case that comes to mind in that respect is Japan Airlines, Captain Kenjo Terauchi.
Yeah, that was an interesting case, and I know that Richard Haynes, who was formerly of NARCAP, did a great deal of work researching that, and he was on my show a couple times way back when, and he mentioned that he was responsible. He did a lot of work to get Captain Terauchi back his job after being ostracized because of reporting this sighting. So Japan Airlines, that really is a very interesting case to look at as well.
Yes, definitely.
And so I want to ask you, because we're getting ready to go to a short break, but I want to ask you, do you view what we're dealing with as a threat? The UFO phenomenon.
In what means? I mean, in what context?
So is it a threat to national security? Is it a threat to aviation safety? Is it a threat to humankind?
Is it a threat to national security? Absolutely. Otherwise, they wouldn't be keeping this secret after 70 plus odd years. Is it a threat to mankind? Depending. I mean, it all depends on the parameters of the question. But I would say in some of the in some of the ways you've outlined the question, I think absolutely. I don't think the United States government would keep this subject under wraps in any particular manner, way, shape, or form if it wasn't a threat. I mean, I'm looking around my office now, and one of the handful of UFO-related books that are still left in my office is the Air Force's official Roswell report from '97. And you don't change your official position on one particular incident at last count 5 different times if it's crash test dummies and weather balloons. You don't revise your statement, your official position, if you're the United States Air Force, on a non-incident after 70 plus years 5 different times if there's nothing to it.
And so explain for people, because I have a lot of new people that are listening to the show and trying to catch up on some of the history of the subject. And so talk about just briefly some of the instances where the government changed their standing on Roswell.
Oh God, I'd have to actually go point by point and actually map it out myself, to be honest. But at first it was, it's a weather balloon. Okay, what was in the, famous photograph might have been a weather balloon. But if you know anything about profiling, or even just simply reading decent body language and facial cues, you can tell from the famous photograph Jesse Marcel knows he's being set up to take the fall for something. The original response was, it's a weather balloon. Then it's crash test dummies. Except if you do the math and you cross all the T's and dot all the I's and follow these little strings where they lead. And again, I direct you to my friend and colleague John Greenwald at the Black Vault. It can't be, because the crash test dummies you're referring to would have had to time travel from some period approximately 7 years in the future. They didn't exist at the time of the Roswell incident. The project they were citing and referring to didn't occur until the middle 50s. This was 47. It's details that, again, like I say, the uninitiated or people who might gloss over a statement or a document and not read through from start to finish might get lost in the minutia or get lost in the proverbial weeds. But it's little things that, hoping that folks don't notice.
And so why do you think it took so long for people at Roswell to come forward?
I think that's anybody's guess. I think simply maybe on the part of the military, it's simply you do what you're told. As a member of the military, I mean, Roswell, of course, was the home of the 509th Bomb Group, and I mean, they certainly had stuff at the 509th that was important, that you keep secret. And, military folks, like each of my grandfathers, for example, I mean, you followed orders. You did what you were told. And, it just simply, you kept quiet because you did. And quite simply, folks who spoke up maybe got passed over for promotions that they rightfully would have earned, or this or that or thus and so. And I mean, and there are any number of other reasons that, strange things happened to, people in power and in certain positions. I'm specifically referring to the death of Secretary of Defense Forrestal. There's a lot of questions surrounding that, and I for one don't think the official story holds water, but that's me.
Right, and there were some peculiar, deaths with other people that were involved in the intelligence community as well, and
any number.
So but when I'm looking back at that now, I'm not sure how much that had to do with UFOs.
Oh, it may not have, but what I'm saying is, you don't rock the boat for a reason.
And I mean, I've obviously, when you're rocking the boat, you definitely, depending on what boat you're rocking, you do get people that are concerned and want to step in and control the narrative, especially when there's some sort of top secret testing taking place or things like that. That's something to be aware of. And so, I don't know, there's so many questions that I have about all of this, as we should, and you do too. And I think this is a fascinating conversation. I want to just thank you again, Nick, for being here, and tell people where they can find your books.
Well, honestly, you may be able to come by it via Amazon still. I do have, a handful of copies personally left, but I'm tinkering with a couple of little projects. I'm hoping I can actually put something out. I don't know. I've been I have a bit on my plate. Right, so, I know. We'll see. Who knows?
Well, that's good. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, and things. And I know life gets in the way, and sometimes it's just best to step away from this subject for our own mental health and and sanity and things like that. But I mean, Nick, thank you so much for being here. We're going to take a quick break. I want to thank all of the people for finding me here on Spreaker, getting into chat, supporting the show. This is a community effort. I want to definitely give a shout out to my guest who is going to be on the show next week, Christopher Borelli. He has done a great deal for our country. He has gained a lot of skills in business and governmental roles, he had an extensive career with the United States military police, and he did much more with regard to high-level security positions within the U.S. State Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of State, and the Mitri Corporation. He owns a company right now that is making things that are absolutely off the hook. I cannot wait until Chris and I have a beautiful dining room where we can set one of his pieces of work, and I want you to go see. He makes this wood epoxy creations to make the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I can't wait to have one of his pieces in my living room, my dining room. And you can go visit his site just to look at that, lmcwoodworks.com. He'll be here next week, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the dysfunction in the field and some of the things that are being put forward by people who are alleging that they know information that clearly, when you dig a little bit deeper and you actually know what you're talking about, they don't. So that's going to be a fun show as well. I will be back. We're going to take a 3-minute break so you can listen to this lovely music from Ben Sound. This song is called Creepy. So you got 3 minutes. We're going to be back pretty quick. Here you go. I am Erica Lukes, and this is UFO Classified. I want to thank again everybody for, joining me and following my work. I'm amazed when I hear from different people who are completely outside the UFO community, who've been paying attention to what I'm doing and are encouraging me because they understand that even though sometimes I come across like I am an avid debunker, which is completely crazy. People understand that this is a discovery process that I've been very open about. I've shared with you. I've cried on my show. I have been angry on my show. I've expressed the emotion that I felt as I've tried to weed through all of the absolute nonsense, which is just put in place to discredit our own personal experiences, to take our personal power away. And it is really sad that there are those who want to mimic the paranormal and utilize that as a weapon. It has been really sad for me on my journey in the past year specifically to uncover some of the things that I've uncovered about Skinwalker Ranch and the Bigelow days and some of the things that were potentially tested on other human beings that were serving their country. This is an important thing. And I hope if you're new to the show that you go back and you listen and you share my work with regard to Skinwalker Ranch with Chris Bartell, with Chris Marks. I've had James Carrion on the show, who was the former executive director of Mufon, who has raised a lot of alarm bells with regard to not only the organization, but Skinwalker Ranch, Bigelow, so on and so on. We deserve better than this. And I want to say, as I did at the beginning of the show, what we're experiencing right now isn't anything but disclosure. This is pushing us further away from it than you can ever imagine. If you look very specifically at the people who are promoting this, there might be a vested interest in making money. And again, you've got people who are in the intelligence community who are sitting at TTSA. And so do they go out there in the public forum and necessarily tell people the truth? Or do they have stories that they're willing to put out to discourage us or to mislead us? And I think that's exactly what's happening. People are making money, and there is something going on behind the scenes that is not in our best interests. So I encourage you to look outside the United States if you want to really look at some good work from researchers with regard to the UFO phenomenon. And I encourage you to maybe be careful when you're in social media settings, because a lot of these groups, I believe, are set up by people that don't have our best interests, or organizations that don't have our best interests at heart. And I want to, before I bring Nick back, I want to say something a little bit about it's an alarming trend for me that I've seen more and more with regard to what the UFO community is doing. And there has been a big push for people to jump on the QAnon bandwagon. And for me, this is very, very, very dangerous. And I want you to know, and hopefully you guys all know this, but the FBI actually declared this a terrorist organization. And so now you're seeing all these conspiracy theories that are rising up about things, and they're not in our best interest. What does this have to do with UFO research? I don't know, but I think the UFO community needs to get a grip and step back and realize that something big is going on, and we need to move away from that. So anyway, that's my thing. I wasn't even going to bring it up because it's a really hairy, dark rabbit hole, but it's important. So there you have it. I am here with my guest this evening, Nick Roesler, who's been involved with paranormal research for a long time and has been actively involved in Mufon, and was Nick, tell us about your career in Mufon, because this is really interesting, and I want to dig into Mufon and some of the things that you discovered while you were working there, the positives, and then some of the negatives.
State director in Mufon's history.
Right. And I want to just say, okay.
Subsequent to that, I had to step away from that position.
Right. And I want to just say,
I wanted to. Sorry.
No, and sorry, I want to go back really quickly because Little Miss Brilliant Audio Skills had had the mic muted. I swear, I was really good. I was making it through the episode. I was so proud of myself. And then, yeah, that happens. But I just want to say, thank you so much for dealing with my lovely audio things. But go back to everything you just told me I could hear, but that the audience didn't hear about your work with Mufon.
Okay, well, as I say, I ended up almost by default, due to an anemic state chapter, pretty much, within the state of Wisconsin, Mufon, assuming the assistant state director position more or less immediately, within my time with Mufon, and I believe it was 2001 that I became state director. My understanding is that I would hold the record. I still am, as I understand it, the youngest ever state director in Mufon's history. I was 21 at the time, 20 at the time. And subsequently, John Schusler had asked me to, take over as the staff photographer for Mufon, for the journal, which I did for a period of time, a number of years. And I've been a benefactor of Mufon since 2007, and that's essentially where things stand. I had to step away from Mufon organizationally. I would I always would go to the Mufon International Symposium. That became my vacation for the year. I ended up having to step away from that for health reasons and others. So life, like you said, life gets in the way.
It does, absolutely. And I know that sometimes we get so wrapped up in all of this, and it can be detrimental to our business life, our personal life. And there are not a lot of people out there that understand a person that is willing to dedicate themselves so much to a subject that is
right.
So out there, not to be cheesy, but
but it's the truth.
Yeah.
And honestly, and it's funny that you mentioned that, so we'll run with that for a second. I mean, honestly, I spent, like you said, my professional life within the criminal justice field, and I was, from pretty early on, everybody in the office where I worked, oh, you're the UFO guy. Among other things, yes. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is. And, as far as my experiences with MUFON, minus one or two of the, to borrow from the late great Stanton Friedman, nasty, noisy negativists, my experience within the organization on a whole has always been phenomenally positive.
And that that's great. And I mean, I know that like I always say, and I even said last week, if I'm not mistaken, with my show with Phil Leach, who was a MUFON whistleblower, that there are good people involved in the organization, and people who dedicate themselves, they spend great money. There's a lot of money,
right,
supporting these chapters and doing different
right.
things. And I think that it's these people, in my opinion, especially after what happened with now the latest bombshell with Harzan being arrested for solicitation of a minor and different things.
Right.
That there needs to be some sort of MUFON needs to be either reformed or it needs to stop, because we've seen, you've heard me say this in my show last week, time
right.
and time again, that there have been some very serious things that have happened within the organization, and the organization does this, they'll turn it back around with public statements, and it's not us, and even Jan Harzan did that with the John Venturi thing. When people started to question the racist comments by Venturi, it was just turning it around and, you people are attacking us, and how dare you, and this kind of stuff. And I think, okay, wait a minute, that's not, if you're a professional organization, you don't deal with that kind of thing. You address it, you make changes. And so why do you think that hasn't happened, or what was your thought about that?
There's a lot to unpack there. And I don't mean to, I've got to be very, very judicious in how we unpack all this. Just given my background and so forth. One, I will say this. My experiences within the organization have, on the whole, been phenomenally positive. Two, barring, this whole recent situation with regard to former Mufon executive director Jan Harzan. I can't really speak on this. I can speak in broad terms, in hypotheticals, etc. The Jan Harzan that was my colleague and friend for 22 years, the Jan Harzan that I knew, was always a phenomenal person, professional contact, personal contact. This is a man who, when I was looking to make changes in my professional career, went out of his way. He said, by all means, use me as a personal reference if you need to. I'm more than happy to, to assist however I can. And he did do that. I've had very positive relationships with folks that are on the Mufon board. A member of the Mufon board attended my wedding. That's where I'm saying is there are personal relationships, there are professional relationships, and they all kind of sort of blend together. As far as John Venturi, I will say this. I did one of his previous books. I did publish because he wanted to get it out quickly. And I was simply trying to do a favor for a colleague. I have had zero to do with John since the comments that he made. I believe that was 2017. And it's, like I said, it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand, that, and I have friends that are in Mufon. Maybe they're not my friends anymore, but I love them. I've always supported them, and I've understood that, like I said, there are good people in the organization, but when the organization is looking the other way time and time again, when you've got people, Steve Hudgens, who has made very racist comments on social media, and Venturi, who was, supposedly demoted, but yet behind the scenes he's gloating because he still has as much control as he did before he was, publicly shamed, and Mufon publicly slapped his hand. He was still back there doing the same old thing. And so how... and I get that there are, you've got your own chapters, and each chapter is a franchise in and of itself, a separate entity, and they're run differently, and things. And so I get that they're not necessarily, they don't know a lot about some of the things that are taking place at headquarters.
Right, and I think that's where you're having kind of an issue. You have and I don't mean to jump all over your point here. I mean, I think you're very correct. You have especially large Mufon chapters. Mufon LA, Mufon Orange County as an example, Phoenix, Colorado, the state of Colorado Mufon. I mean, you have larger organizations, and they run things. I think across the board, you could say fairly well as an autonomous entity, but and there is going to be that disconnect to some degree from the way MUFON, headquarters might be running, or what, like you said, the internal office politics, for want of a better phrase.
And that that is interesting to me, because I feel like you're under one umbrella, you're under one name internationally, and right. If you're in a part of this franchise or a chapter, and some of these chapters make a lot of money, I have to say. MUFON Orange County, MUFON Phoenix, they're bringing in some good revenue there, but then you've got each different chapter who is talking a little bit about, you've got one chapter over here who's talking about the Anunnaki or about the flat earth, or you've got another chapter over here that's talking about actually real science and doing good mm-hmm. work. Shouldn't there be some cohesion from the top down? Because this is an organization that is, all these people are representing the higher picture of this, and there have to be some standards, which I have not necessarily seen, but maybe you can help me with that. I definitely
concur. I mean, there needs to be MUFON is, by its bylaws, by its tax exemption, for goodness sake, a scientific organization in name, and by that definition, there's no place for non-science. Nonsense, non-science, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot of that. But then, it's in that, I think, again, that unfortunately is a problem from the top down and the bottom up, because the people who run these chapters aren't holding a light or a flame to MUFON headquarters when egregious things are happening with the racist comments or the sexual harassment, or now the latest with the accusations about the executive director, or even the fact, and this is a big one for me, the selling of personal data that happened not once but twice. These are things that I don't understand, why people who are paying to be state directors aren't stepping up and saying, wait a minute, this is not part of what I want to be representing. Why are people continually kind of rolling over, and are they using the excuse that they're their own separate chapters?
That I can't really speak to that. I mean, I would assume that sounds like a viable argument based on what you're presenting. I can't speak to that because I have been, like I said, out of the loop to a certain degree for quite some time, for my own reasons. I will say, from my involvement with MUFON, not only did I spend significant money for the MUFON benefactor membership, so I am a member for life. I also, some time ago, I did pull out the credit card and gifted a benefactor membership to let's just say a prominent member of of this field for my own personal reasons and professional reasons. So that, I mean, that should tell you how important I view this field, view that organization. So, I mean, for me, it's a personal thing. I think, like any organization, like any entity of any significant age, you're going to run into some problems just by virtue of we need to adapt, we need to do this, we need to change the way we do things operationally. And I think that's where we run into some problems, just as across the board, just as a broad statement.
Well, and I know that, you know, every organization has problems, and they also have people that are very adept at dealing with some of these things. Especially, you know, you have people that are working on crisis communications, people that are actually adept at getting out public statements and trying to take responsibility for the things that happened and not throwing blame back on the people who are asking important questions. So I don't know why they've never had an effective person in the communications department, and that would be a good start. And then why are, you know, I mean, I look at some of the statements from the now executive director, who again is kind of pushing blame and on other people when we're simply asking questions because the executive director was just arrested for solicitation of a minor. And so people have a right, and all of you who care so much about Mufon should be front and center and talking to the board of directors and saying, what are you guys going to do? Because you're making us look like complete dumbasses. I want to just say that. And what are you guys going to do? How are you guys going to hold the people that are on the MUFON board accountable until they do the right thing for all of you?
Well, you know, all I will say is, and again, I can only speak for myself. I've had some seemingly nonstop communications with a number of colleagues in the field over the last 10 days or so, since this matter hit the news media, hit the mainstream, as it were. I will tell you that I've fired off a letter to the MUFON board, not so much dealing with these changes need to be made, but more along the lines of requests for, you know, internal information, the types of, you know, things that would normally be public record as a nonprofit and so forth. The point that I've always kind of sat back and wanted to make a point of is I think that MUFON as a board, rather, I think MUFON's board could do quite a bit if they relied a bit more on their benefactors and the talents of those benefactors who have spoken with their checkbooks and their wallets about their commitment to this organization, and utilize us to help set some policies and help move forward.
And I want to talk about that, and I agree they should absolutely reach out to people that have ideas and have scientific backgrounds and things like that. And I want to talk a little bit about somebody who I mentioned last week on the show that was part of the inner circle where you donate money to the organization, and that person is Jay-Z Knight. And she is she's been accused of quite a bit. And something that was disturbing to me, and I see this pattern within Mufon, is the absolute racist demeanor and comments that are being made. And I want to just get your thoughts about this, because she did say there's quite a really interesting some videos of her online where she is channeling, the 3,000-year-old god Ramtha, whatever, and she's on there talking about, and I want to just read this again because I think this needs to be said time and time again.
I'm familiar with her by name only.
Yeah, you should look into her, because this is a person that's donating to the show, and also that Jan Harzan has gone to different cocktail parties with, but she it's a cult organization. And you look at any other videos, you can clearly see that. But one thing that she said, about the Jews, she stated in 2011, F-U-C-K, God's chosen people, I think they've earned enough cash to have paid their way out of the goddamn gas chambers by now. And so this is a person who was on the inside of MUFON, who was donated a considerable amount of money. But yet when the Venturi scandal happened, again, this was, we have nothing to do with Jay-Z Knight, but this, that simply isn't the case. So,
except that they cashed the check.
They cashed the check, but how many other checks were there, and how much were they listening to her behind the scenes? And why would you take money as an organization from somebody that has been accused of so many serious things? Why would an organization do that?
I don't have an answer for that. I will say personally, with regard to the quote you just read attributed tonight, that bothers me deeply, because my mother and my sister, and obviously through my mother's family line, there is some Ashkenazi lineage, so that's a personal thing.
As for me as well.
Well, so I mean, I am God's chosen people by that, per that quote. And that's, yeah.
It is
that's
interesting.
Disturbing at best.
It is, and I think another, disturbing thing that she says, and she has a lot of followers out there, and it's interesting, and I want to just highlight again, the point that Phil Leach made, that they, when Mufon was called on the spot about their association with Jay-Z Knight Ramtha, they, said, oh no, this was a one-time thing, but then Phil Leach stated that Harzan was at different functions with her trying to solicit donations. And here's another thing that she said that I want to just put out there, because this needs to be repeated, is that she teaches there is no right or wrong, and that people create their own reality. Okay, yeah, we create our own reality. I got it. Creating reality means that crime victims are to blame for what happens to them, not the criminal. The victims brought it on themselves through some kind of bizarre karmic need. So crime victims deserve no compassion or help, not even children. So this is the ideology of
Ramtha. That doesn't really square with how I spent 2 decades of my professional life. So sorry.
Right, exactly. And so, and I know that about you. You've done a great deal, as have other people, and your family members done a great service for all of us. And so when you hear things like this, when I heard something like this and I started looking into it, and then wondering why in the world the organization doesn't address these things, or, I guess their idea of addressing things is brushing it away or deflecting blame. But would you, as somebody who cares about the organization, would it be good for all of the members to come together and demand that there is some sort of accounting, and people know who is funding the organization and what their motivations are?
I would say that's certainly reasonable. Quite frankly, MUFON is a nonprofit organization, and we do have a right to see the books. We do have a right to see, of course, the 990 tax statement and much more than that. And, quite honestly, what I think MUFON needs, and this is just me as an individual, and again, probably strongly informed by my professional career, but MUFON needs, in my mind, to enact a personal conduct policy, a zero tolerance policy, fairly similar to the one that I had to live and operate under in my former career. And I'm sure other members of the law enforcement, criminal justice field within MUFON would share similar stories, in that I was considered to always be on duty, as it were. So how I conducted myself in public, social media, those types of things, could have repercussions professionally. I know people that I had worked with at various points in my career had lost their jobs because of things that they did in their off hours. So, quite honestly, there needs to be a policy of some sort, because even if you're a volunteer member of MUFON, that is to some degree at-will employment. And, the statement with regard to former executive director Harzan that I was seeing over social media, and again, I know nothing other than what's publicly available, but the statement that some folks I had made via social media had said, well, isn't he considered innocent until proven guilty? It's like, well, yes, that's when you're talking about a court of law, and that's very much true. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about as a matter of employment.
And I wonder if he's still getting paid.
But simply as a matter of employment, I can speak to some degree on this, in that I've seen it happen with, for example, people that my father was associated with or worked with the Milwaukee Fire Department. When, and the fire department and the police department and such, as a rule of thumb, if you are charged with a crime, there goes your job. And quite simply, that's what happened here. It should be fairly standard language in whatever kind of employment agreement there is between the MUFON board and whomever their executive director might be.
And so with regard to that, we saw, as I mentioned back in the John Ventry days, it was, so he's no longer in this role or blah, 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 blah. But then we find out through different statements that he has just as much control as he did, but that it's just people are trying to hide that fact and things. And so
right.
At what point, will the MUFON board ever address the issue? Is Jan Harzan still on the payroll until the investigation is complete? Will they address this? That's important.
Well, my understanding is, and this is granted only from what I've been able to glean, just as a member, and through whatever Mufon's public statements have been. He was terminated as executive director. That statement has been made. Okay, understood. I would not be necessarily surprised if he was receiving a pay in that this is an ongoing open matter. That would not surprise me. I don't know one way or the other as to what the situation actually is. It's speculation on my part.
Right.
I'm only basing that on my experience in other areas. I've known, for example, there's a gentleman within the last year who was a former colleague of my father's on our local fire department, who was charged with regard to some sexual related offenses here in state court in the state of Wisconsin. And he was on paid leave pending the internal investigation by the Milwaukee Fire Department and the city and the Fire and Police Commission, etc. He ultimately resigned and was allowed to keep his pension and such. And granted, this is not an analogous situation, but it's the closest example I have to give you.
And thank you. And I certainly hope that you and your colleagues who have invested so much time and money into Mufon and want to see it succeed, I hope that you can all come to, an agreement as to how to approach the board and hold them to the fire, because they continue to do, just as they did with me when the Elaine Douglas files were taken by Jan Harzan and put in the black hole the day before I was supposed to go collect those files to put them out for everyone to see. And so
and I knew Elaine personally, and so that's all I can say. As I knew Elaine personally, so I have an interest in, people need to know what a phenomenal researcher and person she was.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think for me, and I know that I've had, of course, people inside MUFON are, trying to say that I need to let things go, or I'm doing A, B, C, and D, and I want to, of course, they're trying to deflect attention. For me, I care like you do about this subject.
Right.
And anytime something like this happens, it is a huge black eye on the people who have dedicated their lives to historically archiving this and to try to get this subject taken seriously. Here you've got another instance where it's like, okay, wow, you couldn't get any worse right here.
Well, and like you said, dedicate your lives to this field.
Yes.
I joined MUFON not long after my 18th birthday. I'm turning 40 next month. This is literally half my life. And kind of to your point, I had a conversation 4 or 5 days ago with I'll simply say a prominent member of MUFON, prominent researcher, who asked me point blank, I've known you for 20 years. How are you not sitting on the board? I said, if I were asked, I would serve. And I said, they have my phone number. All they need to do is ask.
And it's and that would be good. and I think, another thing for me, is the fact that you can ask. And as I've mentioned numerous times, when I was there and I was going through what I went through, I went to Dave McDonald. I tried to message, even after I left, I tried to message John Schuessler to see if he would have a conversation with me. I have gone out of my way to promote the organization and bring people on the show. Even after I resigned, after what I went through, even after I resigned, I spoke at different chapters because I wanted to support the organization. And now I'm to the point where I think, okay, wait a minute. There are problems here that have happened for years, and there are problems that are not being addressed. And this is a really pivotal time for this subject, because now we've got TTSA out there, and the fact that they're trying to steer the narrative and do all of these things. And I just wonder, at what point in time do we as individuals say we don't need an organization to be a good researcher? We're not going to support an organization who repeatedly promotes people who are racist, sexist, and now perhaps it might have an issue with pedophilia. At what point in time do we say the organization is not worth being involved with?
Again, I think that's an open question. And, I'm not...
I know, and I appreciate you for me putting you on the spot here.
I don't honestly know how to address that, but I will say this, and I said it to, a number of colleagues, somewhat tongue-in-cheek over the last week, but, I'm quite serious. I am retired at this point. My time is my own. I'm more than happy to take the job if offered. Not that I doubt, the qualifications of certainly some of our board members, or any number of people in our field. I could name some names off the top of my head who I think would be phenomenal in the director's chair at Mufon and would do wonderful things. But I've mentioned to a number of people over the last week that Mufon, on a whole, needs to promote, frankly, in my opinion, the right people. We have not treated our female membership the way we should have. We've not promoted our female membership the way we should have. People of color, the LGBT community, you name it, but we need to do better.
I would absolutely agree with you. They need to do better. And I've got a message here from one of my listeners who wants to know what kind of comment it is on Mufon branded events for school children when the executive director is up on charges of soliciting a minor. And are there Mufon branded kid events compliant with local school district standards? What types of outreach is there in the community, and what type of oversight is there on that?
To my knowledge, there isn't really. It does not exist. I've seen, kids and younger people involved at MUFON events, but not to any real great degree. But that's, again, my own personal experience. I really can't speak to that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think given some of the allegations, and then now with the Dave McDonald who's taking over, who owns the Mile High Club, Flamingo Air, and that. So talk a little bit about that. And I'm sorry to bombard you, but I really appreciate you talking about this. This is important.
Speak however I can, and simply to play the devil's advocate. And that's honestly the way I approached the statement of Dave McDonald assuming the directorship of MUFON at this time. my feeling always was that Dave was stepping in for an interim period, whether I don't know whether that's 6 months or 12 or 18 or what have you, but given what I mentioned to William Pullen on his live stream the other night, among other places, is quite simply, maybe Dave was the person who was able to jump in on an emergency basis, as opposed to other members of the board, whether that be for business interests or health reasons, or what have you. Maybe it was as simple as Dave was the individual that could jump in on an emergency basis.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I guess if I were on the board of directors and I had somebody who was accused of child sex crimes, the last thing I would want to do is and maybe this was something that was kind of planned, there was a protocol that took place to put Dave McDonald in, who runs a sex airline, basically, and so you're replacing somebody who's accused of crimes against a child. Right. They have not been. He's innocent until proven guilty. We all know that. But you've got, back in a few years ago, there was an article, and I encourage everybody to read it, from Vice magazine. Nice. That Dave McDonald, did an interview, and here's one of his quotes. I didn't get to read last time, but do you ever? Mm-hmm. This is the reporter asking the question. Do you ever get any requests for extra services beyond just taking people to altitude? Yeah, I'm going to read this to the audience though, and so that do you ever get any requests for extra services beyond just taking people to altitude, quote unquote? Obviously we know they're having sex. That's what the whole thing is about. And he said, yes, I have. We had somebody bring their dog. We've had, that is interesting. We got to look into that. We've had requests for threesomes. We've actually had requests from people in Iceland. And so he said in this article that he basically closes the curtain when some of these things are taking place. And so is it in the best interest of an organization who is dealing with an executive director that was just arrested for this? Is it in the best interest to bring in somebody that has a background like this and who very blatantly talks about taking people up, closing the curtains, and taking kids on their first airplane rides? Is that in the Mufon's best interest?
I'll flip it on you a little bit, but bear with me. Were I on the board, I would have advocated a different interim position, but take that for what you will. Were I sitting on the board in what I can only imagine was a gut-wrenching, horrible emergency meeting to sit through. And I know a number of these board members personally over my time with Mufon, and I can only imagine what they were dealing with. Personally, emotionally, as a matter of business, God only knows. But were I in that boardroom, I would have advocated, okay, for a period of 6 months, we as a board will assume control of the organization. We will run things cohesively, ad hoc, such as it is. And during this time, we'll conduct a search for a replacement candidate. Whether that's within the organization, outside, etc., we're going to conduct a formal candidate search. Until such time, we as a board are not naming an executive director, an interim executive director. We are assuming control. That would have been my suggestion, and that would have been the way I would have liked to have handled that situation. Were I a board member. Right,
and absolutely, I think that would have been the correct way to handle things. Were there, with the board directors that you talked to, do you really feel that they were caught off guard by this? And was this,
I have no reason to believe otherwise.
Okay. And
I have absolutely no reason to believe otherwise.
And so were they caught off guard with regard to some of the racism that we've seen, blatant racism in the organization? Were they caught off guard, or have you ever talked to them, or have they addressed that to you?
I have never spoken to them with regard to any issues that we've been discussing. My understanding is, they've said they did not know of Mr. Harzen's arrest until it was made public. I have no reason to believe otherwise, because I have seen almost verbatim the similar type of circumstance happen professionally other places. As I mentioned, the firefighter example I gave you earlier. I've no reason to believe otherwise.
And we'll hope and assume that is actually the case. I think the interesting thing, unfortunately, are the comments made by a couple people on the board in high up positions that have been all about, oh, poor us, and we're getting bombarded with these people who are throwing these arrows at us and we'll rise through the ashes. But there's no attempt to address concerns. And this has been a thing that has gone on time after time after allegation after allegation. And so I hope that you and your other colleagues can put something together where you attempt to, reform Mufon. Hopefully it will work out better for you guys than it did Elaine Douglas and her the people
Right.
that tried to help her. And so I hope that you do that, and you definitely ask for more transparency. I think a non-for-profit should be pretty transparent. And so, so what are your plans from here on out to make sure that happens?
Honestly, I'm taking it day by day, to be very honest with you. But to be real blunt, my feeling is what my feelings are, and what my advice to the organization and the board would be is, your initial statement, the optics are bad. The initial statement did not really help things. It came off as wooden, stiff, fill in the blank however you like. Honestly, I would have liked Mufon to open up their checkbook, hire a PR person from the outside, someone from inside, I don't care. Someone with a professional background in communications, even if it's, in the short term. Honestly, mend fences, bring back some people with backgrounds in law enforcement, even to help you consult, if that's the right word, or be your PR person in the interim. Someone like my friend and colleague James Clarkson of Washington State. Bring back somebody with the experience and the gravitas and the respect within the field that helps you right the ship, that helps you weather this storm. Because they as a board, just taking everything at face value, which is all I can do, it's hellish.
It's a fail.
I've read police reports and criminal complaints and so dozens, from any various any angle you want on a professional level. I worked in an office for about half my career that was a sex offender unit. So, I mean, I've seen, in print all sorts of ugliness and then some.
Right, which would be the reason, all the more reason why you should, get in there and be a leading voice in changing Mufon or holding the board accountable, making it more transparent, and then making the changes needed. And I think that, some of the big points, for me and other people that are looking at this is the fact that the data shouldn't be bought and sold at the highest Bigelow, Bigelow. Huh. Well, Freudian slip there. That
was it?
Oh yeah. Well,
I jest. I'm sorry.
I know. That's a shock that people would sell, private information like that. But it did happen, John Carpenter. Some of these different things that happened, right. And you also have, like I said, these people that are coming forward and asking people on the board for help when they're dealing with sexual harassment, that they're trying to stand up to racist remarks and some of the things, and they're wanting to make the organization better, and they're in there paying money, they're in there volunteering their time, and so. I hope that you can you foster a change and that you can get a group of people together that can hold the board accountable. And I hope that if the board chooses to do what they've done continually, that at some point in time, people will say, I no longer want to be associated with this organization because this field, this subject is way too important to have that black eye on it, and we need to distance ourselves from that and then actually go out and do good work. I mean, do you see that happening?
Honestly, I think all I can say is I think the organization needs help, needs a course correction of some sort, but whether that's an infusion of new blood, new board members, new state directors, what have you, we can get there, but we can't get there if we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Right, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
I don't like being in a situation where someone I was associated with, close to, hell, sent Christmas cards to over the past 2 decades, it now stands accused of something that I spent my professional life dealing with.
Right.
And, I would leave, my place of employment and come home and write books and do radio shows and do the Fox Mulder thing, shoot for the basement office with no heater windows. And it's a bad position to be in.
It is, and I want to say that, I've heard a lot of people, say, okay, we knew Jan, we loved him, we support him, and we're shocked, but I don't think I've really heard that many people that have come out and say, wait a minute, if this is true, what about the potential victims? If there were more, obviously we know that there was a sting set up, but if there were victims, has anybody come out and said, we feel for the potential victims in this, or is it all we feel for Jan? And I want to ask you, and I'm glad that I've got my own show now because I can go a little bit over time because I think it's important. So everybody hang in there with me. But what are your?
I'm here as long as you need me.
Yeah, what are your thoughts about that? And then I want to ask you too about the people that are high up in Mufon now that are trying to peddle the Jan Harzan was framed, hashtag set Harzan free kind of stuff. I mean, what are you?
I can't speak to that because I've only heard it reported. I've heard you mention that. I have not heard, that's not been said to me directly. other than postings on social media and so on. I did have one fairly prominent researcher who I respect very much play the devil's advocate and say, hypothetically, if this turns out that there is a trial, there is, an acquittal, there is this, that, and so on, well, what happens then? Well, I said, hypothetically, any number of things could happen. But, you could have such and such happen, you could have such and such happen, you could have this happen. Again, it's all a matter of hypotheticals, and I can't speak to something that hasn't happened. I can't speak to something that is not public, because I honestly don't have any information that's not been otherwise publicly reported.
Okay, and then that's good to know. And I want to just say, again, we're getting ready to close the show, but I think Phil Leach hit it home last week when he debunked the attempt to say that Harzan was framed and different things like that. And I guess the word on the street was that Harzan had a couple of videos that he was getting ready to release, and it would have blown the lid off the UFO topic, and that's why he was framed. And Phil brought up a really good point. Well, shouldn't others in MUFON have those videos as well and things? And so what would be the point to frame Jan? I can't really think of any. It's not like he was pushing boundaries with any of the UFO research or being public about anything. And to be honest, MUFON, I don't see MUFON as a threat to the man, because they've obviously are buying and selling information to people of the highest bidder, government contractors, whatever. And so I don't see Harzan as a threat that would have needed to be set up. But that's just me. Your thoughts?
I can't really comment because, quite honestly, I think, Phil Leach was fairly accurate in what he said. And I can't imagine a situation that Harzan would have, citing video or this or that or whatever video he may have had that was supposed to drop or what have you, that any of the, I believe, 6 other members of the board would not have had.
Okay.
Or have had access to.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you, rolling with the punches and letting me ask you some hard questions, because at the end of the day, I know you care about the topic. I care about the topic, and we might disagree, but at the end of the day, we want to see the right thing done, and we want to see integrity in the subject, and we want people to take it seriously. And this is one of the big obstacles, unfortunately, to having the subject taken seriously, is this kind of stuff. So thank you so much. Where can people find you and reach out to you if you want them to?
Where I can be found? Honestly, we're in the middle of a global pandemic.
Right.
I spend my time on Facebook. You can find me. I'm around. Colleagues and researchers who know me, you should have my phone number and email. Call me. I'm around. Erica, like I said, we might disagree on the small things, but, we disagree professionally. That doesn't mean it has to turn into a situation.
Right, absolutely.
It might turn into a 30-second temper tantrum, of the West Wing variety. You need to listen because you just need to listen, and that's it, and that's all. But that's that's basically it. The same goes for you. If you need anything, if there's anything I can do to help you, call me.
Yeah,
Drop
absolutely.
me an email. I'm around. I got nowhere else to be.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your, you're being so candid and talking about this. I know it's not a pleasant subject, and I want to just say, and thank you, Nick, so much for being here tonight. I want to say to my audience, I know that I've had people, trolls, whatever, say that I'm skeptical and that I'm, on I don't know, payroll, or I shouldn't be so negative. But here is the thing. I believe in the integrity of the subject. I believe in all of the people that are listening to my show that have had experiences. I believe that we deserve better than this. I know that we have to weed through this and expose corruption, and we have to work together as a community. This is a group effort. We are working against things and organizations and contractors that have had a vested interest in this and are making a lot of money. And this has been something that has gone on since I believe the late 40s. And so it's a lot to come up against. Right. But stay strong, stay the course. Don't get sucked in by some of this nonsense that's going on right now. This is too important, and we deserve better. And thank you, Nick, for being here. And I also want to just give a shout out to all the people in chat, all the people that are listening, and there are a lot of people listening. I appreciate your support. You can go to UFO Classified to make a contribution to the show, or ericalukes.com. I appreciate you very much. Next week, I'm going to be bringing on somebody who is a show supporter, who has a lot of important information, who's been looking back at the scene, and I believe that this is going to be a very, very enlightening conversation next week with my guest, Chris Borelli. I hope that all of you have a wonderful night. Be safe, and make sure you don't stay on Facebook too long, because it's never in the greater good of your, your mind. I'm just saying. So thank you, Nick, and all of you have a wonderful night.
You too. Thank you so much.